Hello, and welcome to Charisms for Catholics. My name is Jill Simons, and I'm the executive director at Many Parts Ministries, where we equip the body of Christ by helping people learn about and discern their charisms, which is really another word for spiritual gifts. When you discern your charisms, you're able to see how the Holy Spirit is already active in your life and where He is inviting you to further build the church. Let's dive in. Hello and welcome to today's episode of the Charisms for Catholics podcast. Today we are back talking about more saints for a specific charism. Today we're talking about the Charism of Knowledge and several saints that give us some insight into what it looks like to really live with this charism. So that if this is one of your charisms, these can be people that you look to amongst the huge communion of saints as an example of what it looks like to have and to use this charism. And of course, this isn't exhaustive. There's tons of other saints for each of these charisms, but we've pulled out a few that seem to really exemplify the core of these individual charisms. So once again, to talk about our saints for knowledge, we have my wonderful friend and employee, Theresa Zoe Williams, with me, and she's going to be sharing with us about three saints today for the Charism of Knowledge. So thanks so much for being with me, Theresa.
Hey, Jill. It's always so good to be here. I love doing this with you.
So let's go ahead and kick it off talking about our first saint for the Charism of Knowledge.
Yes. So this one's exciting because his final miracle needed for canonization was just approved. So this is Blessed Carlo Acutis. What a fun guy this one is.
Yeah.
I wanted to start. So I'm starting most recent and going back in time with these three for knowledge. And I thought that would be good because we need modern examples to understand how we use it today. And Blessed Carlo is a perfect example because he was born in the 90s and the 1990s, that is, and he's a millennial. He would have been in his 30s right now. But what he's famous for is for cataloging all of the Eucharistic miracles on a website and with info on each one so that you could learn more about the Eucharist and have a greater Eucharistic devotion. And so just his knowledge of all of the different miracles that have happened is incredible. That's a huge feat to catalog as many as he could, but I think there are hundreds on his list that just from all over the world. And he did all of this work himself. He did the grunt work for it. And then he made it accessible. And so going into that, he also had a lot of tech knowledge, which is very important in today's day and time. So there's a lot of different kinds of knowledge, and Carlo shows us two different kinds, like that tech knowledge, that modern, what's happening right now, technological information knowledge. And then there's also like spiritual knowledge. And he shows us both of those kinds. And I just love that because it mixes something that's timeless with something that's very in a moment. So you are made for your moment. Wasn't it Catherine of Siena that said that, aren't you made for a moment like this? Or that was in Ruth. Maybe I was made for
Yes,
Ruth.
maybe perhaps.
Sorry.
And the Catholic translations are much less fun in how they say it. If you go to what is it? The KJV, I think, version is perhaps this is the moment for which you are created. I want to say the Catholic versions are like just a lot less pithy and direct to a powerful quote. But yes, that's the sense we have with Esther specifically.
Esther, that's the one.
Yes.
Gosh, sometimes I get my Old Testament ladies confused. Sorry, everyone. That's really true, and that's why it's part of the Bible. Because it's true for all ages and all times that we will go through. You were made for this moment. And Carlos shows us how we meld those things together in ourselves uniquely. And so and he's just a fun guy, period, because he's so close to us, and he would only be a few years younger than me and you, and he would have gone through and did go through so many of the same things that we have seen. And
he was Spider-Man for Halloween. He
had a pet bunny. He loved video games, but he also loved being outdoors. And didn't he play a sport too? I feel like he played some soccer.
Sure. He is definitely one that we have taken as a patron at many parts because of the connection of technology and creating a space for people to greater encounter what the Lord is doing, which is, of
Yeah.
course, what he was doing with miracles. And just as a reminder for everybody listening, the crux of knowledge as a charism is about being able to synthesize information and pull it together from diverse sources. So, like Teresa's talking about with the Eucharistic miracles, this wasn't something that there was a fully complete synthesized kind of glossary or index of these things that had existed before. So he was pulling this
Right.
information from very diverse sources to be able to make that something that the church could then access in a clear way, which is so often the way that knowledge works, is to be able to bring all this stuff together to transmit it to people in a way where people are like, okay, I can deal with that. I can interact with that kind of synthesized, boiled down version of things. I probably don't have the ability to go out and read all these different sources and pull it all together, but this I can use. This I can take what I need for my personal faith.
Knowledge is very, I love that you don't like, you think of knowledge as just knowing things, but really, like you said, it's about bringing it together in a way that's accessible. And
Yes.
Carlo did that so beautifully for his time, which is our time. Just, I just love that he used what was there in front of him and what was out there and brought it all together so that we could have that. I
Yeah.
think that's very special. Not
Yeah.
that anybody else's contributions aren't special, but it's special for us because we're living it right now. We're living the direct benefits of what he did. We just had the National Eucharistic Congress that happened, and a lot of stuff that happened there, they used Carlo's resources
Yeah.
for just very beautiful work that has direct impact on us. So I couldn't not include him in this list.
I love it. So who is so you said we're going back in time. So what
Yes.
time period are we going back to for our second person?
Oh, I knew you would ask me this, and I knew I wouldn't have an
Oh,
answer.
shoot. Sorry, I didn't mean to put you on the spot.
I had looked this up, but I didn't write it down. 16 and 1700s.
Okay.
So we're dropping back quite a little bit. About 300 years is what we're looking at here. So Saint Alphonsus Liguori. He is such an underrated saint. He's like a sleeper hit, I feel like. So he
Deep track.
started out a lawyer, and so he was able to pull knowledge from all different kinds of things and from people of all walks of life and synthesize these in ways that would help people in their pursuits. And that's a great use of it. But he saw how the secular world turns on a whim, and he didn't like that. He didn't like the instability that the world offers. And so he he was pretty famous as a lawyer at this point, but he gave it all up and went on to study to become a priest and all of that. And then he wrote, so he probably has a secondary charism of writing as well, because he wrote on moral, theological, and ascetic matters, giving us clarity and understanding on certain points of faith, certain points of moral theology, certain parts of, like, how would you describe ascetic for someone who doesn't know?
Oh, just like what the denial of self like
Yeah,
really is
that's a
for
good
and
one.
what it looks like in the Christian life and where that falls in things.
And he was very good about making this understandable to large groups of people. So he had this knowledge in his head that he could then transmit in a completed sort of way. And these, again, were things that hadn't been synthesized before that he was writing on. Because of all that he did, he is named a doctor of the church too. So I love that he's not one you hear about very often at all, and yet he plays this almost like a pillar part in our theological life and our moral life as Catholics.
And that's
And
something you see so commonly is that knowledge coming alongside another charism that's really
mhm,
about the transmission. So having it together with writing, or sometimes it's together with teaching, or together with another mode that helps you have that means of relaying the knowledge you've synthesized.
yeah, and he's just such a beautiful example. He was such a beautiful man and just very mild mannered, especially after he decided not to be a lawyer anymore, and just a very calming presence in the world.
Yeah.
And I think it's just so beautiful that he then had this bigness inside of him that he was able to get out and invite people into.
Yeah, that magnanimity. That's
Yes,
awesome.
that's a great word. I love that word.
Who is our final saint?
Our final saint is someone dear to me again. I guess they're all dear to me. Once you learn about someone, how can they not be dear to you? But Saint Jerome, Grumpy Jerome, and he was known for being crotchety. That's his big thing. I love him for it. It means that anyone, regardless of temperament, can
Yeah.
become a saint, can be
Yeah.
holy, can be close to God. Why? Because we're all made in his image, and it's just about surrendering ourselves to him and to his love. And Jerome did that despite being very crotchety. He once got in a fight with St. Augustine over different matters, and they sniped at each other and everything. And then they were able to repair their relationship and be on friendly terms before they died. But just his temperament was not an easy one to get along with, unlike Alphonsus Liguori. Jerome, we're going back really far.
If he was a contemporary of Augustine, then that would be like
The fourth,
300s.
yep, fourth and fifth centuries.
Yeah.
So now we're going back about 1,000 years. So really early on. First of all, he amassed all kinds of knowledge. So he studied Latin, Greek, grammar, philosophy, rhetoric. He studied under St. Gregory Nazianzus, um, who then imparted lots of theological and moral information to him. And so he's got all of these things going on in his brain. And what it really synthesized as, he translated the Bible from the Hebrew and Old Latin into the Vulgate. And that was the gift to the world, so that suddenly everyone could understand it. As long as you had a priest or a learned person among you, you could understand the Bible in terms that you could understand now. And then that leads then to the translations of the Bible that we have now. It made all of this possible. But he needed all of that knowledge first. And he studied Latin and Greek and grammar, philosophy, rhetoric before he became a Christian. So he had
Mm.
all this going on pre-conversion, and then had his conversion, studied under one of the greats, and made friends with Augustine, so many other contemporaries of that time. And then he amassed more, and he needed all of these diverse types of knowledge to be able to translate the Bible, because it's very diverse. It talks, even just looking at the Bible as a history book, it spans so many different eras and decades and cultural and social understandings that you really had to understand what was going on in each of these time periods to understand what these different things mean in the Bible, and why they're using the wording they are, or the traditions they are, or whatnot. And I just love him for it. He's my favorite uncle's confirmation saint, so I have a soft spot for him. My uncle is also a little crotchety, so they get along very well.
A good fit. It's a great thing that you pointed out, like, the education and really the mind that he had prior to his conversion, and so many people will point to that and be like, "How can you say that's a charism? Because clearly this is, like, something he could do, and he even pre-baptism and stuff." And that's a good reminder that grace builds on top of nature, and so this really truly supernatural thing to have been able to translate the entire Bible at a time when it had not been done before in that way is something where grace is overlaying the way that God made him to be, right? Because he doesn't have anything in his makeup that isn't designed intentionally by God. So a lot of times people will say, "Oh, I know someone who's just so smart or so whatever," and fill in the adjective, but they haven't been baptized. Does that kind of contradict this idea of charisms or something like that? And that no, that person is likely just called to really greatness in that area, because that's where grace would likely overlay and take that
Mhm.
ability even further if that's something that they receive in the sacrament of baptism. And so I love that example. That's what's happened for him, that he had that very natural inclination towards learning, a great mind for it because God created it that way. And when we see grace overlay that, we have incredible things happen.
Right. We forget that. I think we forget this because we're very invested in infant baptism as Catholics. Having that grace from the very beginning of your life, which is a huge help. That's a whole other conversation, but very simply, it's a huge help to have baptism very early on. But because of that, we don't get to see a lot of what nature has given us. We see it
Yeah.
overlaid with grace a lot more
Mhm.
often than we don't. So we forget that God made you a certain way so that grace can then build upon that.
Yep.
And so even whatever charisms you do have, you had them naturally first. They were given to you as gifts naturally first, and then grace built upon them. Um,
Mhm.
I should have said this in music, but a lot of big musicians were actually baptized Catholics.
Mm,
So secular musicians, so like Dave Grohl of the Foo Fighters was baptized
mm,
Catholic. And then you see all of the great work that he's gone on to do in music and in his personal life. He's very devoted to charities and helping the poor and the
mm,
homeless and things like that. Pete Wentz and Patrick Stump from Fall Out Boy were both baptized Catholics as kids.
mm.
And so you see grace building upon nature even when we don't let it, when we're not actively allowing it to, when we're just passively allowing it to. And just again, grace builds upon nature. I love that. And I love Jerome for this too, because he's such just a great example of how, and Augustine is too, if we're
Yeah.
really looking at that. We're gonna talk about him later, but in another episode. He was an adult convert basically,
Mhm.
and he had all of this knowledge beforehand too, and then how it exploded once he was baptized, once he
Yeah.
was Christian. And so Jerome and Augustine are really great examples of that explosion that we see happen from grace, not because we didn't have it before, but because now it's given its supernatural quality.
Yeah. Absolutely. Thanks so much for sharing about these saints for knowledge with us. We will see you back in 2 weeks when we'll have another episode looking at more saints for a new charism. And on our off weeks, we're having regular episodes of the podcast, so you can catch those as well. If you have never left a review for the podcast, I really encourage you to do that, because that helps a lot of new people to come across the podcast as they're looking in general kind of Catholic podcasts. That shows them this as an option so that they can discover more about their charisms as well. Thanks so much for joining us on today's episode of Charisms for Catholics. If you would like to learn more about your charisms or begin your own discernment journey, head to our website at manypartsministries.com, where you can download our free PDF guide to all 24 charisms and also begin your own journey by taking our charism assessment.